Here I'm putting on the constant force spring to the KRMx02 CNC machine. So a couple things I've already done. Installed these vertical aluminum brackets. These are 1 inch by 2 inch aluminum angles, 1/4 inch thick, I believe. I better double check it. No, 1/8 inch thick. So 1/8 inch thickness, 1 inch by 2 inch aluminum angles. Drilled them a hole at the top for a 3/8 inch bolt, 7-inch long bolt, and then drilled the necessary holes down here to mount it to the linear carriages. So these holes are all 5/16 inch bolts, and these holes are for 3/8 inch bolts. I don't remember the drill bit diameters off the top of my head here, but it's in the rest of the book, the sizes to drill holes for those bolt sizes. Also, I noticed this as I was installing them, I had to redo it, but be sure to notch out for these adjustment screws here. So for what it's worth, they don't look like this when they come. They look a little more like right out of the I guess they're extruded. So after I was done working on them, drilling all the holes, I sanded them down. I think I sanded, there was quite a bit of gouges, I guess, from filing down you know, the holes after drilling. So sanded them down with 60 or 80 grit on an orbital sander, random orbital sander, 5-inch. I went from 60 to 120 to 220, 220. So 3 different sanding, and they're definitely smooth, but they match the finish of the other aluminum parts a lot better than they did straight from McMaster-Carr, which is where I ordered them from. So if I had it to do over and a little bit more forethought, I would have taken them to get powder coated along with the other parts, but not worth it for just these 2 parts. I would have got charged a minimum shop fee. So going on, got a constant force spring also from McMaster-Carr. I'll try to remember to put the part numbers in the video description here, but I've already mounted this on a spool that I designed and 3D printed. I think this force has a this spring has a 14-pound force, and the spool is just I think it's 2 1/4 inches wide and a little over 4 inches in diameter on the inside, and there's a little lip here. But the spring spins freely on here, and then I've got obviously a hole in the middle for the axle. Also printed just these spacers, which will go on either end of the spool when it gets mounted up. So I'm going to attempt to mount this up with the phone in one hand. So I've got a 7-inch long 3/8 inch bolt. So one there. So I got 1 spacer on one side, and again, these spacers are sized so that the interior gap between between the inside of the angles here is exactly 6 inches. So first goes the spacer here, then the spool. Okay, and then the other spacer. I'll have to put down the. Here we go. Let's see if this will work. It's not going to work. Bear with me. Okay. So I've got both up. Make sure this, the way I'm doing it, the spring is facing this way. And then a little bit protrudes out here. I just used a clamp. I've kind of already dry fit all this, so got my technique down. A clamp to tighten that up, and you don't want it too tight because I do want this to be able to rotate a little bit, although I don't know that it will. When it runs, it'll probably just rotate the spring on here, but and then you've got enough left over on the end here for a washer, lock washer, and a nut. So I'm gonna go ahead and load that up. The other part I designed and 3D printed here is what you see, which is a bracket of sorts that I attached the other end of the constant force spring to. It was originally designed just to hold my power cord and water cooling hoses that go straight down to my spindle, which sits here, and then there's also a vacuum attachment that bolts on the end here through there. When I 3D printed it, I embedded some nuts in here, so that takes 1/4-inch bolts, and I'll do that after the fact, but that keeps everything lined up directly down on top of the spindle and the air exchanger. So, but nonetheless, I modified this, put a slot in here for this part of the spring to go down into. If you notice, there's these 2 holes here which bolt into here. Of course, they're not the same spacing as the aluminum extrusions, so they're tighter. So on the back side here, on the back side of this piece, you'll see I've got the carriage bolts which come down into the extrusion. Of course, the square got crooked. But there again, you see those 2 washers here. So those are for 1/4-inch bolts, 1 inch long, which once I put the constant force spring down into here, bolt those through, tighten them up, and then they're recessed enough so that they stay flush, so that when this bracket, I'll turn it around. So when this bracket comes down, you know, they won't rub or anything like that, and similarly, they won't be able to come out. So that's how this is going to work. I'll follow up with another video once I've got that all hooked up, but that's definitely going to take some time and both hands, if not. Okay, so I've got the constant force spring attached to this bracket with these 1/4-inch, 1 inch long bolts right here. Found obviously it's best to take it out of the slots to get that, but here you can see the back of this a little better also this way. So these obviously keep it aligned. These carriage bolts keep it tight, and then those are recessed plenty. So these particular slots right here were a pretty tight fit. I've tried this once and had to take everything back apart and dry fit it a little more to get these a little more to fit a little better. They're very tight fit, so when you put them in there the first time, the aluminum shaves off just a hair of the plastic, but they slide in pretty nicely now. So hopefully this time around it goes a little smoother. So again, I'll need 2 hands, so I'll pause for a bit. Okay, got the bracket in with the spring attached. It was not easy, but nonetheless, here it is. I don't have it fully tightened down just yet because I don't know exactly how high I want this to be. The spindle cable comes out of here. It will go into this side bracket here, and then out the back into the cable chain, E-chain, dragon cable. So yeah, that's what it looks like. The motor's not installed, as you surely noticed, but it is sized. The height of these is pretty much just right to not interfere with the motor. So I'll probably have to reset the Z switch here, and I'll probably end up putting a Z stop just to fine tune it. I may lose an eighth or a quarter of an inch because it did hit if I went if I put the rail all the way up into the right at the center line of the bearing, I would be hitting, but if I bring it to the bottom of the bearing, I think I was okay. But nonetheless, you won't lose much. If that is a problem for you, I suppose you could drill these holes just a little further to the bottom on the aluminum extrusion, and you'd get a little higher. I kept mine, I don't know, about 1/2 to 5/8 inch up from the bottom, it looks like. So another thing worth noting that you'd probably figure out, but you have to reduce the number of spacers from the Z switch plate or whatever this is called here, this bracket. Just remove some of the spacers and adjust the screw and bolt lengths accordingly. I think that's pretty well it. Yeah, I'll report back once it's done. Another thing I'll mention, I might end up printing just a 3D spacer to go in here, kind of to sit between the Z motor bracket and this bracket here. I won't mess with that until I get this thing correctly positioned vertically, but I don't want this spring to start pulling this up. I have these reasonably tight, but I don't want to over tighten them either. So I don't want that to slide up over time. So if I can put a spacer there that backs up against the Z motor mount, then that won't happen. So I'll measure that once it gets in place and maybe implement that. Other than that, I think that's pretty well it. It certainly moves. If I just spin the screw, it certainly moves up a lot easier than it. Now there's not much weight on it, but it was still you know, a little bit difficult to do. But moving up is certainly just as easy as moving down now, which means it's working. So it's also worth noting, as I did notice when it was moving up, the spool's not turning, but the spring is turning on the spool. So I don't think that's a problem. It's still working. So that's it. Here are the spacers I ended up installing in the event that the constant spring were to ever lift this bracket. Again, it's bolted in here with carriage bolts. But nonetheless, I went ahead and printed these. They're about, I think about 124 millimeters high. Whatever that works out to. But you see they're just match the profile of the aluminum extrusion. So, and they don't look half bad when they're installed either. So they just fit right in, and that's that. So I think once the motor mount or motor plate for the top of this is installed, I'll probably loosen this and just tighten everything up here and make sure it's all snug. But that's pretty well it.